Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm excited to introduce you to our guest. Before I do that, here is a quote just for this episode. It is easier to find men who will volunteer to die than to find those who are willing to endure pain with patience. Julius Caesar.
That's a pretty good one.
Our guest today is somebody I could ask them what they think of that quote, and it won't just be mumbo jumbo that comes out of their mouth. They're a coach, a mentor, performance expert, a tenured leader in the mortgage industry, and help those well beyond that. Have sold mortgage company, been involved in all levels of leadership. We're way ahead of the curve in a lot of ways when it came to content and putting oneself out there. I remember seeing them back at events years ago, kind of like on the come up, as they say, in that way. But little did all those other people know that they were coming after the prize. They were the real warrior. The mortgage marketing expert show among I know there's the entrepreneur show I want to ask about because I like the title just eluded me, but I went on the mortgage marketing expert and I listened to my episode on there of this person, and I got to say thank you for putting up with me because that I must have been had a manic attack that day because so there the our guest today, Phil Treadwell of M1 Academy, is a supporter of Culture Matters, a friend, and an early adopter to the Culture Matters, having me on a show. Really appreciate you, man.
Man, I'm excited to be back. I'm not sure what appearance this is. We've been on here a few times. Always an incredible conversation. Always very thought stimulating, and love to have conversations with you. Excited to have you back on the Mortgage Marketing Expert podcast, as well as the other podcast that we're getting ready to launch in the coming weeks, which is the Business of Success podcast that you're referring to
There you go.
in terms of anyone in entrepreneurship, leadership, sales. We're gonna have an incredible lineup when we launch this show, yourself included. So I'm excited to do some more recordings where I'm on the other side of this conversation.
This easier to find men who will volunteer to die than to find those who are willing to endure pain with patience. Where does your mind go when you listen to that? Julius Caesar, too.
I think patience is a difficult thing. We don't want patience as humans. We don't want to be held accountable. We want things now. We also forget that anything that's worth anything in life typically isn't easy. It's hard. And so, because of that, I think what the quote is probably referring to is it's easy to make a decision of this is for sure what's going to happen. You're going to lay down your life, you're going to die, it's going to be over. Versus if you're patient or if you have to endure anything, you don't know what's going to happen. Most of us don't like the unknown. We want to deal with the known. So because of that, most people would rather have a negative outcome that they're aware of than just not to know what to expect. So that's typically where my mind goes.
What do you? How much do you see that in business today?
Man, all the time. It's funny because, especially as a performance coach, as a mindset coach, I run into people all the time as I speak, as I have conversations. Everybody wants the lists. What are the 7 steps to success? What are the exact things that I need to do? And it's not that easy because if I give someone a list of 3 or 5 or 7 things that they need to do on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, that probably isn't the right recipe for them, because if those aren't organic to how they do business, their audience, their personality, then it's probably not going to be sustainable. And the other problem with it is when that happens and it doesn't work for them the way that they want, they're like, well, these 5 things or these 7 things don't work. And then they go somewhere else and try to find the other list of 5 or 7 things. So it's about understanding the individual, what it is they're trying to accomplish, what's their North Star, what is it that is unique to them, what's their personality type, how do they connect with people, where can you take ROI positive activities, that return on investment, and combine them with ROE activities, ones that return energy, that we actually feel better after we're done. That's where someone's zone of genius is combining that ROI with ROE, because then we go do things that are profitable, that are moving the needle in our lives and our business, but also don't exhaust us physically and mentally. And that's the recipe that most people don't want to look for. I use an easy example of like food. 100 years ago, you had to grow your own food, hunt your own food, kill your own food, and then cook it. Then all of a sudden, stores came along where you could buy food and then just take it home and prepare it. And then all of a sudden there was places where you could just go eat prepared food. And fast forward to today, we open up our phone, we pick places that have prepared food and they deliver it to our doorstep. And because that happens in that era of our life, when it comes to business, we have this mentality of if we just pay enough money, it'll be done for us. We'll have the finished product delivered to us. And that's not the way success happens. That's not the way you build business. That's not the way you build culture. That's not how you accomplish anything that's worthwhile.
Are you see where's your what are your views on entitlement is it within positions of authority, uh, yeah, authority, power, influence, and the entitlement as it relates to the positions at the top of the organization?
Man, entitlement is a huge issue. And it's actually one of my, I hate to use the word pet peeve, but I don't like entitled people. We're not entitled to anything. You're not just automatically deserving of something. You've got to pay a price. You've got to sacrifice. And a lot of times, what happens, going back and combining what I was just talking about, a lot of people think, well, I did this thing or I paid this price. Therefore, now I'm entitled to this position, or I'm entitled to this authority level, or I'm entitled to this pay increase. And that's not necessarily the case. The process of growing, the process of achieving something, the process of anything in life and business is paying a price and working hard to get to that next level. When you get to the next level, there's another price to pay. There's another process you have to go through. Good things will happen along the way, and there's things that you'll get along the way. We're not entitled to anything. And I think entitlement is rampant, not just in business and in culture. But yeah, someone thinks, hey, I was a top performer, therefore I'm entitled to be a leader. Well, the challenge is the qualities that make a good leader aren't necessarily the qualities that make a good producer. Or someone says they've been with a company for a period of time and they automatically think they're entitled to the promotion or to that next level. And that's just not the case.
Have you found that people that have good, so producer, right? Relationship with customers, different dynamic, potentially, relationship to peers.
So 100% different dynamic. Yeah, I think that what makes someone good at capturing the attention of a client, of a consumer, right? I think in a previous podcast, we talked about marketing is about getting someone's attention. And you and I kind of unpacked the difference between marketing and brand, right? Those are different things. But what makes someone good at capturing attention and even building brand is not necessarily the one that understands how to get the most out of people within an organization or rally someone or a group of people around a cause, or more in your wheelhouse, building culture, making people feel like they're a part of something. Tony Robbins talks about our two biggest fears in life. Our second biggest fear is not being enough, not being good enough, not being smart enough, not having enough money, not being attractive enough, which plays into our biggest fear, which is not being loved, not being liked, not being loved, not being included, and not being a part of something. What makes people good at making people feel a part of something, especially in a professional sense, where you get the most out of someone and they feel, excuse me, and they feel fulfilled in what they're doing, is a different muscle than capturing the attention of a customer and solving a problem for them, because people pay for those solutions to their problems. And I think it's as simple as breaking it down to one works in the business and one works on the business, and that's a different thing. It's a different dynamic to try to juggle on a day-to-day basis.
Where do people go wrong?
Man, that's a tough question. I think where they go wrong is they're not self-aware enough, right? We all have natural talents and abilities. And I think where people can really excel and grow and find that zone of genius is taking those natural talents and abilities and then developing more skill around that thing. We're very quick to want to learn or grow in areas that we aren't good at. But the challenge is if we're not good at it, we don't like it, and we're never going to be extremely proficient in it. So it's about understanding, what is my superpower? I know a lot of people listening, or even myself and you have even thought about this at different times, but what am I good at? Right. I'm not a phenomenal athlete. I'm not a phenomenal speaker. I don't analyze information, but it might just be understanding and being empathetic with people, or being a great gift giver, or understanding how to relate to people. If you can find that simple superpower that comes naturally to you, and typically it's as simple as, what do you like doing? We usually like to do the things that we're naturally good at, and then really developing a high level of skill. So where people go wrong is we try to get good at things that we're not good at, or that we don't like doing, thinking we need to be, quote, well-rounded. And we don't need to go wide in our skill set. We need to go deep in one or two things that we really are passionate about, that we're really good at naturally, and then taking that skill to the next level.
Hmm. What speaking? How important is it for someone to be able to speak before a group if they're in a position of authority?
I don't think it's necessarily a requirement to be able to speak to a group of people in a position of authority, but I do think it's a requirement to be able to communicate. And I think that there's a difference. Standing up in front of a group of people and speaking and delivering a message is different than being able to draft a good email, or lead a phone call, or record a video, whether it's a training video or a hype video, promo video, something like that. You have to be able to communicate a message, a vision. You have to be able to communicate what it is that you're wanting out of them, or what they need to do. Just being able to stand up and speak, I don't think is a requirement, but the communication piece of it is.
Why? Why is that communication piece
I
important?
mean, in a position of leadership, that's what you do, is you lead people. Now, the argument can be made that part of that is leading by example. Hey, they're going to follow you. What is it? The famous George Patton quote. We herd sheep. We wrangle cattle, but we lead men. Lead me, follow me, or get out of the
Oh,
way. From that perspective, we
oh,
people will follow anyone that's going somewhere, and a part of that is action. I mean, even as a coach, I can't preach on daily habits and non-negotiables and being disciplined and staying accountable if I don't do those things myself, right? If I don't get up when I say I'm going to get up, if I don't follow through with the action habits, if I don't do those things, part of that is action. But you also have to be able to communicate to them, how do they do that for themselves? It's not about being a carbon copy of what I do. It's about understanding the process, the system. If you're in a position of authority, in a position of leadership, everything you do, everything you teach needs to be learnable, teachable, and duplicatable. But you have to figure out what is that for people and communicate that message. Communication is very important. Again, from the culture to the processes within your company to the goals that they're trying to reach. And then you have to be able to break it down for their position, or them as a person, and show them how to do that.
what are some behaviors or um, examples that you're seeing in the current marketplace that owners are potentially undermining their opportunity to grow, to win, to build?
Sure. I think that it goes back to that self-awareness. A lot of leadership and ownership within my industry, and probably a lot of industries, were very, very successful in what they did as, in their quote, come up. And the world has changed so much, not just in the last 4 or 5 years since COVID, but in the last 10 or 15 years in business. When you talk about internet, when you talk about social media, when you talk about the way that we disseminate information as a culture. So what happens is the people at the top of a company, especially when things are difficult, they preach this quote, back to the basics. Well, back to the basics doesn't mean doing it how it's always been done, or doing it an archaic way. It's, what are the principles that made the basics work in mortgage and real estate? They talk about having coffee appointments and being belly to belly and face to face. Well, you can't do that in today's society in the same way. But the underlying principle is that business has been done, is being done, and will always be done based on relationships. So when you take the principle of relationships and say, okay, what's relevant today? Well, that means engaging with people on social media, starting conversations, and then potentially taking that offline in your lead generation efforts. You can't just pound the phones. You can't just make 100 phone calls. People don't want to answer phones. There's a lot of people on their voicemail that say, "Hi, this is Phil. If you've reached this voicemail, you don't know me very well. You need to send me a text message because I don't answer voicemails," right? I have a friend that's
Wow.
almost verbatim what their voicemail is. So you can't just take what's always been done and do it again. You have to take what's relevant to today. And a lot of leaders are doing their companies a disservice by when they step in and try to inspire people. They've got to make sure they understand what's the underlying success principle that we're trying to articulate here and put it in terms that are relevant to today's market.
How important or unimportant is it for the ownership of the organization to be engaged in all and all in?
I think it's very, very important for ownership and leadership to be engaged, especially during the challenging times. Because what happens is, again, we follow people. And I had a mentor tell me one time, whenever I first started building branches and areas and regions, was that people don't quit companies, they quit leaders. And I think that that is very true in a lot of sense. Now, a company may have a bad model, or maybe parts of the company can't perform at the level someone needs. But I would argue that a really good leader will show people how to achieve their goals within that system, or they'll step in and fix some things that are broken. I know that there was one company I built a really large region over about 6 years, and there wasn't one loan officer that came to work for me that was there longer than 90 days that ever quit. It was always people that we let go for performance or maybe for some other reason, but no one that stayed 90 days ever quit in that 6 year tenure that I had. And a big part of that is I encouraged them to talk to other companies whenever those people would reach out. That allowed me to re-recruit them. That allowed me to see pros and cons about what other companies were doing versus what we were doing, and gave me an opportunity to make our company better. And so I think that when it comes to showing up for your people, you can't just, sit on the, behind glass or in a boardroom or whatever and just expect to be a figurehead. If you're not there showing up, having conversations with people, re-recruiting them, encouraging them, helping them when they need it, solving their problems, showing them how to achieve their goals through your system. If you're not actively doing that, or have people that are representation of you in the best way to do that, you're missing the boat and you'll have a lot of attrition.
What type of person is that's listening, that's in a position of authority? Let's say they running an organization. They're not sure what the next step is. How do they how would they know that that they're compatible with you as a servant to that, or a helper in that? Like, if they were listening to this right now, they feel as though they need to get to the next level. So they want to engage you, Phil.
You're
Uh,
talking about a leader within a company that wants to engage me specifically.
yeah, like, they're running, they could be at the very top, right? The chief executive officer. That what do they need to think about to um to be sure that they're not wasting theirs or your time?
I think it's a situation of, you have to know what it is you're trying to accomplish. There's a lot of people that say, I need a coach, or I want to get better, or I want to improve on something. My first question is, okay, why? What is it that you're wanting to accomplish through that? You know, I don't just read a book for the purposes of reading a book in almost all instances. Now, if it's something that a friend of mine wrote, or, whatever, I might read it just to read it. But in most instances, I'm picking up a book or listening to a podcast because a situation came up where someone said, "Hey, go read this book," or, "Hey, I read a book that talks about that." It's the same thing whenever you talk about coaching, when you talk about adding in a consultant of some type. There's typically a problem you want to solve, there's an objective that you want to achieve. So the first question that I would ask is, what is it that you are trying to accomplish, and what's the problem that we can try to solve together. Because coaching and consulting is not a do it for you. It's not a quick fix. There's nothing that I offer, and I would argue that any coach or consultant offer that they couldn't figure out or learn on their own eventually, right? There's no new information out there. They could go potentially figure it out on their own. What coaching and consulting does is shortens that curve and helps them identify blind spots. Someone else that has different experience that can impart that into wisdom. But I also think that one of the best ways for any leader to kind of figure out what it is they want to accomplish is to talk to their people, visit your locations, visit your staff. One of the things that a company did that I worked for that I thought was incredible is about twice a year, they would have some of the leadership visit all the locations. I'm sure it took a lot of time and resources to do this. And when they went in, they would meet with people and have conversations, but they would have these sheets that were anonymous. And it was start, stop, add, get rid of. And it just was like list, hey, things that we're doing that we need to start doing, things that we're doing that we need to stop doing. What are some things we want to add, and what are some things we want to get rid of? And it was always a pretty profound exercise as someone that worked for the company of like really thinking through, hey, what do I really like? And what do I not like? And it felt like you had people that listened because they compiled all those and then they shared it out with everyone. Hey, here's some feedback we had with people. And I thought that was a very transparent thing. And I think it gives people an opportunity to feel heard. Now, if you don't do anything with it, then all it is a futile exercise. But in this situation, in the context that you're talking about, a leader can very quickly find some of the blind spots in their organization, identify what problems they want to solve, and then engage someone like you or I and say, hey, here's what we want to accomplish. What are some solutions? What are some things we can do together to get there? But you have to know what you're trying to do first.
What if they're afraid?
I would say tough beans. You know, we're all afraid. I heard a quote the other day that said, uh, bravery only comes after you're scared. You can't be brave before that, because if you're not scared of it, then it's not bravery. So I think if someone's afraid, then we need to have some self-awareness and say, what are you afraid of? Well, I'm afraid of knowing how bad it is. Well, then it's probably much worse than you think it is. All the more reason you just need to lean in and try to figure out what that problem is so that you can solve it. Otherwise, it's going to be much worse than the fear that you have. And again, it goes back to nothing that's worth anything is ever easy. And sometimes the first part of that is just getting over your fear. There's an easy example of a lot of people are, if we're all standing in a room, a good friend of mine, Kyle Draper, he's kind of a social media expert in real estate and mortgage space. He used this example that I thought was really good. He said, if we're all just sitting here having a conversation, I'm talking to you and speaking to you, everyone's pretty relaxed. But if I just hold my phone up, even if I'm not recording and I just point it at you, people all of a sudden get nervous and they, kind of get antsy. And I think it's interesting that people will have conversations with other people. And then when you turn on a camera, their entire demeanor changes. Or when you put them in front of a group of people, their demeanor changes. That's fear. That's anxiety. I mean, we could get into the scientific part of system one and system two, right? The fight or flight response, that part of your brain versus the decision making part of your brain. There's a real biological response that happens there. But the same way that with getting in front of a camera in front of a group of people, you can teach your body to change that fear, fight, or flight response into motivation, into energy. You can do the same thing within your company. That fear, that anxiety of, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. I'm kind of scared about, what this looks like. You can very easily, again, I'm a mindset coach. M1 Academy is my company. M1 stands for Mindset First. You can very easily switch that mindset into a drive to actually want to make your company better. It's just a matter of understanding what it is that you're afraid of, and then how do we use that as a drive to accomplish what you want.
What do you want to learn from the Business of Success podcast?
You know, I think I like to learn, and I think it's interesting that you could take 10 different people that come from 10 different backgrounds that had 10 different roads to achieve, quote, success in whatever they did in life and business. Their journeys were all different. They all had to overcome different things, but they all have the same principles that they used to get there. And I'm just interested to continue to learn more about how people are wired, how they took a success principle like embracing failure, or understanding how to digitize reputation into a brand, or understanding what type of business they're truly in. Because typically it's not the product they sell or the service that they provide. How did they use that individually for themselves to overcome their obstacles, to overcome their challenges? Those types of stories for me are super empowering, because I think the more we understand that all of us are different and the paths we get to our goals, to success, is very different, the principles that you use are very much the same. I'm finishing my book right now, What the Uncommon Have in Common. And uncommon people are ones that put all these things aside. No matter how bad you have it, there's always somebody that had it worse. So that's going to remove excuses. So these commonalities that all truly successful people, all high performers, all uncommon people, ironically, they all understand the same concepts, these same principles. So that should give people hope, because then all you have to do is figure out what those principles are and then apply it to your life and business in a relevant way. And you get to have that type of success as well. You get to have those opportunities and you get to help that many more people.
Hmm. Um, right now, are people leaving and quitting on their dreams and goals?
I think they are. I think it's more pronounced because of the state of the economy, the state of different industries. I think people do that anytime. I think most people quit when it gets hard. And that's really what I want people to understand, is it's supposed to be hard. If it were easy, they wouldn't need you. If they could do it on their own, they wouldn't need to hire people. Life is hard, business is hard. It's supposed to be. That's why it's also rewarding. But there's a good book, and I can't even remember the title's escaping me right now, but in the book it talks about everyone quits on their goals on the same day, and that's the day after perfect. Right? When we start a New Year's resolution, we start a goal, we try to be perfect. And then when we're not perfect, we quit. And that's why embracing failure is so important, because there's never a situation where doing nothing is better than doing something, even if you fail. Because if you
Hmm.
do nothing, you get nothing. If you do something, you either get a result, you get a win, you move the needle, or you take a loss, you fail. But that L in loss is an L for learn. You have an opportunity to learn something. So as opposed to us being perfect all the time, because we're not going to be, I know that's a shocker for everyone, but as opposed to trying to be perfect, understand that mistakes are part of the process. Failure is part of the process. They're not opposites. The opposite of success isn't failure. The opposite of success is excuses. We make a lot of excuses. We lie to ourselves a lot. And I think people need to understand that it's supposed to be hard. So if your dream is worth it, if you want something bad enough, you'll go through what it takes. There's a statistic that 92% of people don't achieve the goals or the New Year's resolutions that they set for themselves every year. And they do that because either one, they're not clear about what they want, which we talked about, or two, they just don't want it bad enough. So sometimes we just have to find something we want badly. So if someone's quick to give up on their dream, if they're quick to give up on what they really want, they don't really want that bad.
Um, man, thanks for the wake up call. Got to work harder.
I've got a shirt that says uh, nobody cares, work harder, or something like that. So, I think that sometimes we carry this hard work as a badge of honor, and it
Yeah.
takes 10 years of doing stuff behind closed doors day in and day out to become a quote overnight success.
Do you think our
And
culture is losing, or is, yeah, pride of work? Like, was hustle culture the tipping point of that loss? Or is that, I don't know. It seems like more and more I come into contact with people that it just isn't a top priority.
I don't know that it's necessarily that we're losing hard work, like the pride of hard work per se, but I do think that we're sensationalizing the shortcut. We're sensationalizing what we're proud of. These people that, hey, I put 3 videos on social media, they went viral. Now I have a ton of followers, and look at all the success that followed. And we try to put out there, hey, all you need to do is get quote lucky like this, or put out some videos. And I think that what we need to be focusing on is, how do we do the right kind of work? I preach the 3 E's: effort, effectiveness, and efficiency. Right? The effort's the work we do. We have to track the work that we're doing. Then we need to look at, okay, what got results? What were we effective at? And then the 30 is, if we stack our day and time with the things that we're effective at, we now become efficient. We're not wasting time. So I don't know that our society's necessarily uh, lost the pride of working hard, but I do think we're sensationalizing how quick can we get there. Gary Vee is the one that talks the most about this. People think they hit 30 and they've not accomplished anything with their life, and they're down in the dumps because they forget how long life really is. And so most people just need, earlier you talked about patience, most people just need to be a little bit patient. We overestimate what we can accomplish in a year, but underestimate what we can accomplish in 10 years. And that's really what people need to grasp.
What do you think about? I've been observing. I feel like it's a sense of, I should feel shame as a business owner if everything isn't working in my absence.
Um, okay, so
Like in so many of the books, and there's like the
you're
air of
referring to Robert
entrepreneurship.
Kiyosaki, the cash flow quadrant.
Could be just the idea of passive or
Right, right. So
on and not in, or like the dichotomies, the nuance,
correct.
not to negate the value of the components of these
Sure.
sentiments, but it's like that there's this air of, I'm constantly being told or implicitly influenced that like I'm doing it wrong if insert.
Right. Yes.
And what, so I'm curious, what if we, in closing, like, kind of cliffhanger that.
Yeah. So I think that where the context goes for me is Robert Kiyosaki, who wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad. He also wrote the cash flow quadrant. And on the cash flow quadrant, if you look at a plus sign, one side of it's active income and one side of it's passive income. And the comment that's made a lot to people is, you don't truly own a business until you can walk away and the business runs without you. Otherwise, you just quote own your job. And I think that the sentiment that you're talking about is, well, you need to feel bad about having this business because this business can't run without you because it's no longer passive.
Yeah,
And it and
yeah,
it
there
goes
you go.
and it goes back to the
Yeah.
understanding that, do you realize how long, this is what I would tell someone, do you realize how long it takes for a business to get to that point that it'll truly run without you? So if someone can start a business, assuming they're an entrepreneur, I think there's a lot of people that are good entrepreneurs. They know how to run a business, but they're not truly an entrepreneur. And I think entrepreneurship has gotten glorified as well, where, in the 80s and 90s, if you called yourself an entrepreneur, it just meant you were unemployed, right? You couldn't get a job. We're now this, like you said, the hustle culture of having a side gig or being an entrepreneur is glamorized a little bit. When I think Andy Frisella says there's only about 15 or 20% of people that need to actually be entrepreneurs compared to the masses that they're telling
Yeah.
everyone.
Oh my God, that's such a great, because the glamorization of entrepreneurship, first of all, if people are thinking there's something they're not, then it's like creating a whole bunch of unproductive narcissists.
That's right. That's right. It really needs to go down to,
Oh
you
my
need to
God.
work a lot more than you think you do. And most people look up and say, hey, am I done yet? Do I need to do more? What do I need to do? How long is it going to take? And the answer is always more. If you're asking yourself if you need to do more than you do, as soon as you know, hey, we're at a place where I can step away, that will be abundantly clear. You won't have to ask the question at that point in time. But no, I don't think people need to feel bad about themselves for owning a business that doesn't 100% run on its own, because most of the time that's not the point of it. The point of it is
And
to
actually,
accomplish something differently.
since you brought Kiyosaki, this will be the first time that I say this in public then. I think that advice ends up destroying the culture because, and I would argue it's probably a consequence. He wrote a book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, basically, you know, unreconciled resentment for the patriarch. That's like Old Testament shit. Like, don't do that. Don't dishonor your name. And ultimately, like, it just, yes. So like those rare, the infinitesimally small number of business founders that end up, benefiting, it ends up destroying the culture.
Absolutely.
Like
Absolutely. I think people need to get over it.
the farther away the sun is from our solar system, we die. We can't be too close. We can't be too far away. There's a reason Buffett is still working. So it's like the irony of like cash flow quadrant telling us that we're losers. You know, Buffett has a job and he
That's right.
shows up to work.
And ironically, he still has a ton of passive income, right? So I love the metaphor of the sun of you can't be too close, but you can't be too far away in terms of
Well, because
the
as soon as he stops reading those reports and doesn't go to work, the people that company owns will it'll be like damn, what's that, the Lord of the Flies. There you go. Sorry, I interrupted you. You were saying something.
No, I think that's great. I also think that in the context of Robert Kiyosaki, he still has the passive income that people want, but he also still has that job for himself. Like he says, as soon as he stops leading that company, the company goes in a very different direction. And you can point out a ton of examples from Walmart when Sam Walton, retired or died, Apple. I mean, you can go on and on and on. But I also think you also don't have to be the smartest person in the room. That's the other thing is that business owners or entrepreneurs think they have to know everything and do everything. And I go back to that story of Henry Ford whenever he was suing a newspaper for slander or libel or whatever the right term is. And in the court case, this newspaper starts quizzing him on like elementary school questions that he couldn't answer. And when he got up to testify, he said, listen, I may not know the answers to those questions, but those four people sitting over in a row, you can ask them any question you want, the ones you did, and then some, and they can answer it all for me. I don't have to know everything because I surround myself with people that do. I think that's an important thing for people to understand. You don't have to know everything and do everything, but you do have to be someone that can lead them and communicate with them, like we talked about earlier.
Phil, if we were to encapsulate this episode, but take away like a call to action for the listener, where's the first place you'd send them? What the first direction you'd send them?
Something I say all the time. You got to follow the 11th commandment, as a mentor told me, and that's thou shalt not fooleth thyselfeth.
Hmm.
You need to have some self awareness. You got to understand what you're good at, what you're not good at. You need to understand what's happening in your company and what's not happening in your company. And I think that a lot of us like ignorance and we like not knowing because sometimes that truth is uncomfortable or it creates that fear. So the biggest piece of advice, the call to action is create some self-awareness beyond what you think you need.
If you're listening to this podcast, follow Phil. Please leave us a review. The Culture Matters podcast. We'll see you next time.